Talk Money.
Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of Let's Talk Money with me, Surabhi Upadhyay. Now, if you track mutual fund headlines, you would have known that thematic funds are suddenly becoming very, very popular. There are lots of new fund offerings that are happening on this thematic instrument side. And in terms of the number of funds being launched and the money being collected, those numbers are really ballooning as well. In fact, if you look at data, industry-wide data over the past couple of months, then thematic funds as a category are pulling in anywhere between 10,000 crores to 15 to 16,000 crores on a monthly basis. So these funds are definitely becoming popular, but are they really worth your while? That is what we're going to discuss on the show today. And to help us wrap our heads around this subject, we have with us Feroze Azeez of Anand Rathi Private Wealth and Ruchit Mehta, Head of Research at SBI Mutual Fund. Gentlemen, great to have both of you with me in the studios. Thank you so much for coming through. Now, as someone who also maps at monthly mutual fund data, I know that every month when we look at the numbers and we look at the net equity inflow number, a large chunk of that is coming via thematic funds, right? And we're seeing funds in all kinds of categories. It could be defense, it could be manufacturing, it could be business cycle, it could be innovation. So we want to start by understanding what is behind this phenomena and how should we look at it as investors. So opening thoughts, Feroze.
Yes, Surabhi, you rightly have observed because you collect the data as microscopically as possible on a monthly basis. So it's obvious that you have got this trend absolutely right. If you have to try to infer why this happens, I would say there are two reasons. One is there is a limitation of how many diversified funds one AMC can launch. Then once you've already put all your bouquet in place and you actually want to bring in two, three more flowers into your bouquet and there's hardly any place, then thematic is a fallback option for an asset management company. But can't be said this as true for all asset management companies. Some asset management companies are using this as a great opportunity to create value. Because the theme identification is best done by the fund manager and research. You have a head of research, right? They are able to identify the themes much better than you and, not you, me and investors. That's a better thing to say. So when you're launching a theme and you're collecting new money at that point in time, that's a message that this is the theme which is good at this point in time. So I would always look at thematic schemes as coming from very credible AMCs as a great identification of a theme which is going to have a run. Now let's assume. If you look at HDFC, it's the second largest AMCs. Of course, SBI is the largest AMC. They launched a defense fund at the right time. And that became the 83% return over the last 1 year. And they also...
83% return, 1-year return on the HDFC defense fund.
Defense fund.
Timing. It's all about timing, right?
Yeah. The timing not coming into equity, timing of the theme. And why I respect this fund a little more is they stopped accepting money too at a point in time. That's why.
So right now they're not accepting money.
In lump sum, they're not.
Okay, I think that's bringing me straight away to the next set of questions. And there's so many that, while it's very natural to want to invest into a particular theme, what are the do's and don'ts around it? What should we bear in mind? And Ruchit, comment on this. I mean, the fact that some of these funds are being launched because, like Feroze mentioned, that, this is the only place where an asset manager can really innovate and come out with new offerings. While that's one, as investors, I think we want to be in thematic funds where there's a real case of, real merit, a real long-term story that's yet to play out. So how should we approach it?
So firstly, I think it's important that the investor looks at the individual theme and understands what are the business prospects of the theme, right? Because not every theme or every sector will do well at all points in time, right? Then it just makes a case for diversified funds. The idea is to say that, okay, at this point in time, if the particular sector looks attractive, like, when we launched our energy opportunities funds earlier part of this year, it was something for us to say that, look, this is a sector or this is a theme that we think is quite interesting at this point in time because valuations are in your favor, earnings growth is looking to be pretty attractive, relatively under-owned as a sector. So this is a right time to probably get into that theme itself. So one will have to spend time to research the theme. Now, a good place to understand whether a theme is interesting or attractive is to say that you take some of the maybe the top AMCs, look at the frontline diversified funds and see what are the overweighting or underweighting, right? So if generally you're seeing that some of the good fund managers in, let's say, large cap or large and mid cap funds are overweighting hypothetically, let's say the automotive sector, then it seems that there is improved business prospects for the automotive sector. So that could be another way to kind of say select a particular theme. And lastly, I think, always speak to an advisor. I think, your advisors will always be able to guide you better because they in turn do speak a lot more to the AMCs directly. They do interact with fund managers. People like them will always be able to give you better insights into what is a particular theme to look at this point in time. So those are the broad three areas I would say when choosing a thematic fund.
Oh, fair point, absolutely. And since I think selecting the theme is such an important part of the whole decision of getting into a thematic fund, let's spend some more time on this. And Feroze, here the risk is real, right? Because when sectors are hot or are in demand, PSUs, you mentioned defense, it could be manufacturing, it could be, tomorrow it could be EV. So a lot of times styles and themes become sort of in vogue and become really hot. And that's when we do see a lot of funds come in. So how do you sort of guard against, while you don't want to miss the bus, but you don't want to be behind the curve, you don't want to get burnt also, but you want the upside. So how do we navigate it?
See, one thing very contrary to what I say when it comes to normal open-ended fund investing, saying never buy an IPO or an NFO in this case, right? For earlier they used to be called IPOs. New fund offers, you never buy a new fund offer for a diversified large cap scheme or a mid cap scheme or even a small cap scheme. So point one I'm making is when you're trying to take a thematic fund, an IPO is a great message. So, or an NFO is a great time to look at that theme. Okay, don't buy open-ended thematic funds as much.
Okay.
But you can definitely, like, consumption has been a theme. Manufacturing has been a theme. If you see 3 great AMCs launching that theme, that implies that all 3 AMCs concur on that theme being undervalued today, like energy, aapne kaha, right? I don't think energy was so popular.
Yeah.
But still, SBI kind of an AMC is having the courage to launch and uses infrastructure to collect money at the right time.
Because energy is, frankly, right now in the market is not sort of a theme or a sector that's in vogue. It's not hot right now. So therefore, this one is an interesting launch. But again, I go back to the question, what about the themes which are running hard, PSU, manufacturing, and then how do you decide whether a thematic fund is right for you in these themes or not?
Basically, that's the warning signal which I'm giving to all the viewers, that if you're hearing a larger decibel on a certain theme, that's exactly the time to sell that theme more so than buy it, right? So, like energy was not as popular. Defense back then was not so popular. So that's one thing which I'm saying. An NFO from a large AMC is a good message that this is a theme. You might not have heard it as many times, but it's a great theme to actually go with NFOs in thematic category and not buy too many themes which are already existing.
Sure. Okay. So one sort of the first step is to identify the right theme. The next question to ask is how much exposure should I take to that theme? And Ruchit, what's the advice over here? How to blend such a fund into the portfolio?
I think we've always told our investors that, look, if you're going to invest into a thematic fund, one is that at a principal level, when you're buying a thematic fund, you're increasing your allocation to that theme, right? Because let's say you have a bouquet of diversified funds in a portfolio and you add, let's say, an automotive fund, right? Or an innovation fund.
Technology fund or any fund.
You're increasing your allocation to that sector or that theme. Therefore, to be more prudent, thematic funds ideally should not be more than 15-20% of your overall asset allocation, right? Okay. Within that, ideally, it's not that you buy a bunch of themes, because then you are sort of mitigating the whole purpose of buying a thematic fund. Okay, buy 1 or 2, maybe 3 at best. Okay, and by doing so, you will increase your allocation to that particular sector or theme that you want. So, let's say you put 20% into thematics, maybe buy an energy fund, maybe buy an automotive fund if you like these sectors, and buy maybe not more than 10% of your portfolio in one particular theme or thematic fund. So that's the broad.
Okay, that's an approach that could be followed. Also, Feroze, is important, right? Because like Ruchit also mentioned, sectoral funds and thematic funds. And sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. But highlight for us the small nuances, the differences between the overall category of sector funds and thematic funds, which may involve more than one sector.
Yes, actually, it's such a customized space. Even in themes, there are such diversified themes or concentrated themes. Like SBI Infrastructure is a part of my model portfolio.
Okay.
Let me illustrate it with this. SBI Infrastructure has so many sectors that I'm not too worried that it is still called a thematic scheme, because it has everything other than pharma and IT. but it's still called infrastructure, right? Because financial services is infrastructure, financial infrastructure of the country. So you will have to look at, like, but manufacturing is a little more narrower.
Yeah.
Right? Business cycle is a little more wider. So whenever it comes to thematic, cannot be top down, it has to be bottom up. Which scheme are we speaking about?
Sure.
Now coming to your pointed question, sector is very, very narrow. Right? So if you're buying a banking and financial services sector, 90% of the money, 80% of the money is going to be in that specific sector. Now there are 12 funds in the thematic category who have greater than 50% of their money in one sector. Now these 12 may be as close to a sector fund than a thematic fund.
Okay.
There are 26 funds who have in their largest sector anywhere between 30 to 50%.
Okay.
So these 38 funds, I would call them as narrower themes, higher on risk.
So you would prefer to be in a more diversified thematic fund than in a very narrow fund, which is then it becomes like a sector fund.
Absolutely.
That's the approach.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. We need to take a very quick break on that note. On the other side, our viewers have also sent in some questions on thematics, and we will get to answering those queries in just a moment.
Let's talk money.
Welcome back. So this week we are discussing thematic funds and whether these theme-specific concepts, whether they make sense for your portfolio or not. So we have a question coming in from one of our viewers, Siddharth. He's written in to us on one of the social media platforms, and he's saying, I want to invest in a thematic fund, but I'm unsure of how to choose one and where to begin. I think very simple, very basic question. It's exactly what we're trying to understand and answer, Siddharth. So, Ruchit, what would you say? What should be the starting point? You said that the exposure to any such theme should not be more than 15% of the portfolio.
Thematics as an aggregate should not be more than 20% of your total investment. And within that, not a single fund should be more than 10%. Or single fund stroke single theme. It shouldn't be more than 10%. So that's the broad thumb rule, I would say. So.
And what are the questions that you'd ask before deciding and checking yes on a fund?
So one is I would want to see whether the particular fund, whether it's an active fund or a passive fund. Okay. Second is between the active funds, is this more of a well-diversified fund? Because one of the more interesting aspects of a thematic fund is, and this kind of gets missed out, is that why actually choose a thematic fund? If you like a particular sector, you can say, oh, but my fund manager already has overweighted the sector.
Yeah.
Perhaps. But what happens is that when you're overweighting, right, you still buy a very limited number of stocks. A typical portfolio is, say, 50 to 60 stocks. If I'm buying a particular sector, I may have 4 or 5 stocks, or maybe 7 or 8. Bulk of them, maybe 50% more, could be large capish or mid capish. You don't get an ability to play a diversified set of stocks. In a thematic fund, typically an actively managed thematic fund will have 20, 25 odd stocks, right? And it gives you a wide basket of stocks to kind of invest in. Like our energy fund, right? We're the same thing. It is not just your traditional large cap names, but there are 25, 30 stocks. Some of them we could have never invested or never looked at because we didn't have the capacity to invest. Now we have a thematic fund where we can invest in some of these securities. So look at that, whether it's an actively managed, A, B, is it a very well diversified fund or not? C is also, again, talk to your advisor, try and get an understanding that is this a theme that's likely to play out from a 3, 5, 7 year standpoint, and based on your risk appetite, you can choose a particular fund that suits your need.
Fair enough. Feroze, you want to add to that? Things to keep in mind?
Things to keep in mind is one, definitely that how old is that theme? Like infrastructure. People, like he said that, Ruchit Saab said that you can't have more than 10%. Into one specific theme because you have to consider risks. This is the biggest anomaly or biggest problem which happened in 2008. Diversified fund had gone 50-60% in infrastructure.
Yeah.
Clients got so attracted and bought 30% more of infrastructure. I have seen a portfolio which had 92% infrastructure. Wow. And then 2008 happened. And you saw drops of 70% in that portfolio.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And Nifty fell 40-50%, but this infrastructure fell 70-80%. So point is, don't go very heavy. Don't go to a very old, popular theme. Now, for example, momentum for the last 2 years was a great theme. There are only 2 funds.
Okay.
That means it's not a rundown kind of a theme. It's not old wine in a new bottle. Right? Energy. you don't have so many funds, right? So that's a newer theme. So always go for a newer theme.
Okay.
Consumption was manufacturing. Now, for example, transportation. There are 5 schemes of transportation, right? And it's the oldest one would be maybe 1.5 years back.
Okay.
So that means this is not still played out. So first thing which investors should look at is it a theme which is old wine in a new bottle, or there's something new which has been identified?
Okay.
Second, don't go passive, is my opinion, because the theme as a concept is top-down. Again, if you go top-down by the full index, top-down plus top-down is not a very dangerous strategy.
High risk.
A very high risk.
Yeah.
If I'm buying a theme, then I will want Ruchir to actually filter down some very bad apples.
Do some, stock picking and get the best sort of companies in that fund, right?
And eliminate, even if you don't get the best, you have to eliminate those 5 bad ones, which don't have the right governance, which an index will not be able to. Index is a growth index. The better it does, the more weightage it gets. More weightage it gets, better it does. It's a chicken and egg story. So never go passive in a theme. I would rather trust a research house to eliminate those 5-7. They might reduce my return, but I'm okay to live without 2-3% extra, but I would not fund a business which is not compliant.
Pretty interesting. And
just to add to one more element, and this is very interesting, that most thematic funds will have a particular benchmark. And if you look at bulk of the benchmarks that are there, roughly 5 stocks, give or take, right, would be almost 70-80% of the benchmark weight. So if you go passive, you're essentially just buying 5 stocks. You're not buying a diversified portfolio. And therefore, active here makes a lot more difference, because you can say, look, I'm not going to buy a very large cap particular stock in the theme just because it's part of the benchmark. I can underweight it and buy a lot many more companies which earlier would not have been looked into.
Yeah,
Please. I want to again add on Ruchit.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example to amplify his point. Bank Nifty, very popular.
Yeah.
2 stocks are 57%. When you ask a person, I met a trader who says, I trade in Bank Nifty. I said, just take a guess, what are the top 2 stocks weightages? He didn't know. And he guessed 25%.
Yeah.
So point is, you might think, and this is a very widely traded index.
Yeah.
You ask anybody who's trading it, would not know that 60% is in 2 stocks.
Yeah.
So what you think optically is a lower risk, when you go passive, you're buying very few businesses.
True. And that's a risk that you have to bear in mind if you're going to be in a thematic fund and then be in a passive fund, which is going to mirror the entire index corresponding to that particular theme or sector. So that's a point well taken. Now, just to talk about the themes here and now. Now, we've done the theory part of it. I think people really want to know what could be looking good from here on. You mentioned energy. I think that's the one theme that SBI has chosen to play. Anything else when you look out and you're looking at structural themes that can run, what should investors perhaps at least consider and go back and do their homework?
Sure. So 2 other thematic funds that we did this year, right? The second was the Automotive Opportunities Fund. See, Indian automotive industry is at a very interesting juncture where, and again, if you build out, say, growth in our country over the next 5, 7, 10 years and the corresponding increase in per capita incomes, incrementally, a lot of the income growth is going to go towards discretionary consumption, right? Because you're starting to fulfill the basic needs of roti, kapda, makan, right? So then people are wondering, what can I buy more, right? And transportation or personal means of transportation are a very significant aspiration aspect of any consumer. So we think that automotive as a sector will play out very nicely over the coming few years. There is also a very interesting aspect of the automotive industry that it itself is going through a bit of a disruption itself, right? With the whole potential transition to the EV space, and you're going to see a lot many more interesting companies come up for listing, which in the auto industry hasn't happened for a good part of a decade, right? So you got new OEMs coming up for listing. So it's an interesting way to play that. The second is that the whole innovation theme, right? And this is a very interesting aspect of India is that again. Today, consumers are willing to look at newer products from newer brands, newer categories of consumption as well. And they're no longer happy with just buying the traditional brands or the standalone brand. They're very happy to say that, look, hey, I saw this on, say, social media, or I saw this in, from at a friend's house, or, through word of mouth. And these are all completely brand new categories. They're completely brand new companies, newer brands, etc. So you're seeing a lot of innovation happening on the product space, on the brand space, on the technology space as well, right? EVs transition, the green energy transition, etc. So I think innovation as a concept in India has a very long way to run. I think it is one of those themes that, in our opinion, could be sort of a multi-decadal thing. highly risky because other than any traditional fund, because a lot of these companies are going to be new age startup kind of thing with burning cash right now.
Yeah.
Profits are going to come later. So for those with a high risk appetite, we would recommend looking at the innovation theme as well.
The innovation theme. Okay, got it. Feroze, your thoughts on this? And sometimes what happens is that if you do have a diversified thematic fund, like you mentioned, infrastructure, I think investors can also ask the counter question that if it's going to have a lot of banks and a lot of large cap stocks, which are already there in my large cap fund, then do I need the thematic or not? So just your final thoughts on the subject and the kind of thematic funds that you would consider.
I think, very microscopically from their basket, I've chosen SBI Infra because the fund manager has been an infrastructure analyst way back in 2007 as well. Okay. So he has seen the fund manager being an analyst of that sector for 15 years brings in a lot of merit.
And he's seen the boom and the crash and the burn, all of it.
And infrastructure went through a very long lull. And your fund manager being an analyst, it's like a general being the soldier.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one reason why I've chosen that. Second, I think it's very important to make sure that when you're looking at sectors, themes especially, when you're looking at themes, you make sure that you stick to larger AMCs. And if you ask me which is the thing which I am excited about, of course, this is the theme which is not translated into several funds. I'm looking at tourism. Tourism, there is an index, Nifty Tourism Index, which takes 30 large companies from NSE 500 which represent that industry, but there are not too many funds which are replicating that. There's one more thing which I am...
There's a passive fund that's come in on the tourism index as well, right? But you're saying don't do passives when you're doing themes.
So I'm waiting for that theme to develop itself.
Okay.
There's also one, Nifty IPO Index, which replicates the IPO performance of the last 100 IPOs.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm really hopeful because what happens is an asset management company gets anchor positions in an IPO.
Right.
Right. Of course, anchor is also oversubscribed, but there's an anchor book which closes before a retail book. Right. So if I, as a retail guy, don't want to open 19 demat accounts, 20 demat accounts and apply for a specific IPO to get those two lotteries, I go through a fund route and capitalize. These are the two emerging themes which are definitely not translated into enough opportunity today. I would be very excited if large AMCs like SBI took it up and brought me something which is executable.
Okay, so tourism and IPOs. If there can be some interesting thematic funds around this as well, something to watch. Gentlemen, it's been a very helpful discussion. Thank you so much for joining in and shedding some light on this sort of new area of investing, which is thematic. So really appreciate you being with us in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this week's episode. Hope you found the conversation useful. Keep sending us your feedback, comments, and queries. We will see you with another theme next week.
Let's talk money